I'll let you take it away, Hassan.
All right. Thank you. Hello, friends, and welcome back. Some of you may be joining for the first time with partners who've been here. My name is Hassan Davis. Uh, I will again endeavor, for the sake of our amazing interpreters, to not get caught up in my ADHD dyslexic cycle where I just start machine gunning information. So I'm practicing pacing as we move into this conversation. If you were present for our last presentation, we were starting to dig into what I call the Hope Dealer's Handbook, the model that hope dealers, who I consider all of us to be, lean into to do amazing work, especially as we think about the conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, and the broader piece, what I call that conversations around justice. And we talked about self as instrument of change. That really is the flow of these first three uh, presentations, talking about how we operationalize and strategically use ourselves, our experience, our own story and narrative to move the work forward. And so we did our bio poem. We had some great exploration and conversation around how we start to dig into our own experience and use that and leverage it in the work that we're trying to do for our communities and the folks that we love. We ended with an assignment to go and look over to do what's called the River of Life exercise. And the River of Life exercise, I gave the instruction for it. And so as we lead into our check-in, I'm going to ask you to be thinking about that. Let me see if I can get my screen to work. And I think I got 37 screens open. Yeah, that sounds about right for me. All right. You all see that? Here we are in our conversation for today. So our check-in for today is in the chat because we don't have time because we only have 90 minutes together. So we're going to just take a couple of minutes here, and in the chat I would like you to share what your mood or emotion is as you enter this conversation today. Really, it's very much about being present in the moment, uh, the action we're in right now. So what mood or emotion do you find yourself in as you enter this conversation today? And for those of you who did the River of Life exercise, one reflection or insight from your going through that exercise. Again, and it's all framed. Our first session was really about self as instrument of change, about authenticity as a leader, leaning into difficult work, and we're going to build on that today. Okay, so in the chat, if you would, your mood and emotion that you come into today's conversation with, a reflection or insight from your River of Life experience. All right, and if there's anyone who would like to just share with the group their experience of the River of Life, or what, if they got anything from that and how they felt about it, we've got a little space for folk if anybody wants to do that. Amy, that's good insight. Every difficult thing that I've gone through has been a learning experience, right? It added something to your leadership palette, give you, a frame of reference that might be different. Better days will come. So it's interesting, and so I'm not gonna. We're gonna actually move from this because what I'm seeing in the chat, which really does tie in well to the conversation that we are going to have today, is that there is a lot of energy and a lot of challenges um, and trying to figure out how we take those and frame them in a way that supports us moving forward is important. And it's actually at the end of our last conversation, we were debriefing the bio poem and talking about some of the things, and some things came up that really struck me as a leader, as a leadership development coach, that I thought would be important for us to dig into. And we're slowly working our way toward this conversation, intentional conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion. And what you've noticed is those words don't come up specifically, but all of this is the building the container. And so, as we continue to think about selfish instrument of change, our conversations today really are going to be about that. Now that we've had the River of Life experience, now that we've had our bio poem and we've talked some about the things that bring us to this work authentically, how we show up, it's really important as we lean into and move toward this big conversation about how we move entire systems to look differently and think differently about people, based on ability, based on race, based on gender identity, all those things that create inclusion, equity, diversity. Compassion, self-compassion is a huge part of the conversation that is always lacking. From my own experience, being in this work for more than 25 years, and my experience of coaching and working with other leaders in this work, it's just something we don't do well. And so I'm really excited to help us move the conversation forward in some meaningful ways. Oops, sorry. Again, like I said, I've only been on Zoom for 2 years straight, but still find myself struggling with it.
Hassan, we're happy to manage the PowerPoint and to manipulate the slides for you if you like. Whatever is easier for you, just let us know.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate that, but unfortunately, this brain and the processing are live all the time. Okay, but it's okay. Give me just a second. I'm almost back on track. You know, one of the things that I have learned in my own leadership practice is about grace. And so the conversation that we're going to have today about self-compassion really is about how we take care of ourselves and give ourselves the same gift that we give so freely to other folk. So what is compassion? And I'm going to read through this, but I'm not going to hit every point. But it's the ability to notice other people's suffering, to be moved by that suffering in a way that we want to respond to the pain. The warmth, the caring, and the desire to help, those are huge parts of what drive many of us in this work, what brought us to this work, the compassion we have for people we love who've experienced disability in so many challenging ways, who have experienced a world that doesn't value them sometimes because of those challenges. We can recognize the suffering, failure, and imperfection are our shared human experience. And so compassion allows us to lean into, to have empathy, to be in sympathy, in emotion with other people in so many ways. And so as we start this conversation, I want to remind you that as a hope dealer, this is what I consider myself and consider all of us in this work, we must do unto ourselves as we do unto others. The compassion, the grace that we show other folk, we have to find a way to show ourselves. And that's not always easy, because we find ourselves very often undeserving of the same love, compassion, and empathy that we show other folks. And so I want to dig into that a little bit. When we fail to have compassion for ourselves, we fall into self-judgment, which, oh, I can't believe you did that. It's that negative talk that drives us. Isolation, removing ourselves from our support groups and our centers, sometimes due to embarrassment. And I always try to speak from my own lens, especially as a self-advocate and a person with disability navigating high-level leadership systems, I found myself at times being caught in these where I judge myself more harshly because I should be the example, I should be the role model. I get frustrated and I start to separate from my support system because sometimes, frankly, I think I don't deserve it, right? Who am I to deserve that kind of support if other people are struggling, or if I can't do these things like other folk? And over identification, really digging deep into that part of us that is wrong, and continue to analyze and analyze and analyze. So there are pieces that clearly create challenges when we uh, fail to take care of ourselves. So there are three elements to self-compassion. There's self-kindness, there's common humanity, and there's mindfulness. And these three components allow us to navigate self-compassion, to continue to refill ourselves up so that we can be of value and use to all the other amazing folk that we want to support, the amazing groups that we want to move forward. And so I think it's important for us to keep those in mind. So what is self-kindness? Self-kindness is being warm and understanding, being able to recognize and acknowledge failure and inadequacies, but not being overrun by them. You know, we don't ignore our pain. We don't keep beating ourselves up. We don't continue to criticize beyond the value of it. And so self-judgment and self-kindness are kind of those polar opposites. And if we slip into self-judgment, or when we slip into self-judgment, the thing we have to do is give ourselves some grace. Common humanity versus isolation. Often when we find ourselves struggling and separating ourselves because of that thing that we did, we're giving ourselves, in some ways, this superhuman talent of being completely unique from the rest of our species around the world. And the truth is, we're not. So when we have the ability to own common humanity, our self-compassion involves recognizing that suffering is a human trait. All of us have it. All of us deal with it on a daily basis. It's not just you. It's not just me. And if I can, there's a quote I heard once. It says, "Pain shared is pain divided." Right? The more that we can recognize that it's not just my weight to bear. It's not just my sin to hold. However you frame that, sin is a loaded word. But it's something that we all carry, and so it distributes that sense of what it is and the impact of it much more broadly, limits the damage it can do. And then, I don't know why my bar at the bottom won't go away, but it won't. Mindfulness is that third piece. That's where we find ourselves in that non-judgmental, receptive mental state where we can see our thoughts and feelings as they are, and not put any extra weight to them, just kind of own them as they are. Sometimes we are in our present moment just being. And so in that same moment, it requires that we not be over-identified, right? Not be digging into and ruminating and dwelling on those pieces that might have brought us into the thinking, right? Don't get caught up in the cycle that takes you down that rabbit hole. And so a big part of failing to hold and to manage self-compassion is the stress, and it gives us the same outcomes, right? Stress in the moment becomes a threat. Threats put stress in the mind and body. That chronic stress in the mind and body creates anxiety and depression, and those things start to live and generate self-criticism, isolation, a desire for self-rumination, right? That internalizing and digging. And so it really is a cycle in so many ways that when we understand not feeding into the very first component allows us to form some dissonance and actually opt out of the cycle as it presents itself very often. So I wanted to share with you this this framework, just another way to look at it, you know, we often our basic stress responses are fight, flight, or freeze, and we've heard that before in conflict. People fight, flee, or freeze. But when we think about how stress as a hope stealer, right, is the thing that's drawing us out of this mindset of being part of the change, internalizing it. Fight becomes a fight in ourselves, self-criticism. Flight, running away, not from a situation, it becomes running away from others, isolating ourselves. And that freeze response, internalized, becomes dwelling, spiraling, internal over-identification, right? And so we often talk about these three indicators of conflict externally, but in order for you to really get the hand on it, you got to see how it's working inside of you. And so when we talk about being a hope dealer, holding self-compassion, these are the alternatives, right? And caught up in flight, in a fight response, instead take a deep breath and embrace your full self. Accept that this is who you are. It's one of the things that I had to do early on. So I'll tell you, I'll be very transparent, and I'll stop sharing my screen for a second. I'll be transparent. And one of the things that I try to do is, as a leader navigating the world like this, is to be transparent. So I'm speaking at this huge conference. Like, I'm the keynote speaker. There are people everywhere, and it's just a few minutes before I go on, and so I decided I should go to the bathroom because, you know, you always, you know, that last minute thing. And so I rush out into the kind of the foyer where everybody's milling around, and I head down the hall and I see the bathroom, and I cut in and I go to a stall. I go to the last stall, right? Maybe what they call way too much information, but I'm gonna go with it. I go into the stall, and I'm sitting there, and the first thing I noticed, I look down at the toilet paper roll, and there's a basket below the toilet paper roll. And I was like, that's so weird. When they start putting baskets below the toilet paper roll, and then why would we need a basket in the toilet? And about that time, the door opens, and I hear this click, 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 this sound of really sharp heels on tile. And I realized those are women's high heel shoes, and several women start to speaking. And in that moment, I realized that I have walked into the women's bathroom, and I've walked to the very end of the women's bathroom, so I am like cornered. and so I put my big size 12 boots up on the door because, you know, I don't want anybody going, wow, that girl's got some big feet. And I'm sitting here panicked, you know, lots of things are going through my head. You know, the not the least of which is I'm a black man, right? It was about to cause all kind of drama. And so, you know, women are doing what they're doing, and they're coming in and out. And finally, there's this moment of silence. And I'm like, I'm supposed to be on stage in a couple minutes, and all this anxiety, this stress. And finally, I hear nothing. And so I take a deep breath, I take a chance. I open the door, and I head out, and I walk out. And of course, this is like the main foyer. So when I walk out of the women's room, I walk right into, you know, 300 people headed toward their seats. And like the whole foyer stops and turns towards me at the same time. And it's one of those moments where, you know, I can beat myself up. I've done this before. I've called myself stupid. I can, you know, you spiral. But I took a deep breath, and I looked around at everybody looking at me, and I said in my loudest, clearest voice, ladies and gentlemen, this is the ladies' room. And then I walked off, and everybody was just like, was that performance art? What was, you know? But I have learned over the years that this is who I am. And sometimes I still make mistakes, even though I methodically plot out things because I want to limit those. What I realized is when I came across the bathroom, all I could read was the last three letters because I was coming from the left side. And so I saw men, and my brain interpreted, and it flipped, and I went with it. I didn't notice the rest of it. That's just how my brain works. Right now, they have pictures, but one of the things that I do is I literally stop and I look at the sign and I open the door and I look for a stand-up urinal as I walk into most public bathrooms now. But it's just so, and the reason I'm telling you that and being transparent is because this is where that 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 stress drives us out of our best work when we're so afraid, especially if we happen to be experiencing other things in the world. Those pieces drive us to assume that we should somehow be managing ourselves better instead of saying, hey, this is who I am. And it's not a this is who I am, like deal with it, life sucks. It's like this is how I am. And it's going to be an adventure if I make it an adventure, or it's going to be a tragedy if I allow it to be a tragedy. And as leaders, it's the same thing. As we think about the work we're doing for others and we think about the moment we're in that is so heavy, so full and fraught with the danger of saying the wrong thing at the wrong time with the best intention, it is so easy to get into that spiral. So that's why this conversation is so important. I'm gonna see if I can get back to my screen. Having 37 screens open doesn't help a lot, but all right, so here we are. So we talk about being a hope dealer, and our self-compassion is our ability in these moments of fight, flight, or freeze to instead cycle into our deep self-compassion and our hope. Embrace ourselves, connect back to our community, find those resources and the people that make you feel alive, that make you feel grounded. Intentionally reflect on that challenging place and find the lesson of it instead of just the terrible moment, right? There's always a lesson to be had too. All right. So as we move, the work really is about exploring ourselves. Remember, self is, bless you, self is instrument of change.
Sorry to interrupt really quick. Donald, please mute everyone, minus Hassan. Go ahead, Hassan. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm doing that.
So explore self and be aware of the hope stealer voice, or the saboteur, we call it sometime, inside. Discover what you can learn from that voice, right? Because the truth is that voice comes to you because it's trying to protect you from something. Maybe it's that experience as a child when things went wrong, and it's trying to keep you from having that experience again. And so sometimes that's why we isolate. We separate ourselves because we're afraid of judgment. We judge ourselves because we want to do it before somebody else does. We ruminate and dig into and over-identify because we want to figure it out before somebody figures it out on us. And so there are a lot of reasons why we get caught in those cycles. But we have to explore those pieces. We have to listen to them. They're part of us. And then we have to motivate ourselves with a new voice. And it's okay to have that voice of caution or reason, one that says, oh, see, I told you messed up again. But we have to cultivate that other voice too that says, and you still do great work, and you move people, and you create opportunity. And so we have to do that. Self-compassion is us building and creating those other voices inside of ourselves that remind us of the work that we do. Be kind. Hold detached curiosity. Ask yourself, what is that I'm feeling? I wonder what that is. I wonder if that has to do with that time I wound up in the women's bathroom and I got so embarrassed about it. I wonder if that's still kind of sneaking up on me. If you find yourself getting into uncomfortable territory internally, just let go of it. It's okay. You don't have to solve all of your problems in the moment, just like you can't solve all the problems of the folk that you serve, the folk that you love, and the community that you embrace at one time. And so being able to, again, hold that grace is important. It's valuable. It's necessary in order to be a true hope dealer. Hope dealers are instruments of change. seeking authentic connections with others who may feel or think differently. This journey will require a difficult conversation. So this is where we're gonna stop for a second. So I want to talk some, I want to ask you, there we go. In this conversation about self-compassion, are there any questions, any comments, any concerns, anything that really struck you, uh, or anything that is not jiving right? I want to create some space here before we transition a little bit. You know, the only rule that I have is you cannot all speak at one time. So,
Hi, Hassan. This is Kim from Illinois.
hi, Kim.
I just really appreciate, my brain likes to categorize things. And so when I have a name, which I think all of our brains do, but when I have a name to call behavior, then it's a good reminder that that's what I'm in. And so I really like the hope dealer, stealer kind of, like it's a easy and in a fun way to start to think through, like, oh, that's what I'm in right now, and how do I switch roles?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, and I think that's been valuable for me too. That's why most of these frames have come to me, is because I've been trying to make sense of them as I've navigated them in real time for the last 40 years or so. So yeah, I agree, and I'm glad that you're seeing the value of that too. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Hi, Hassan. I have a
Melissa?
question. Hi.
Yeah.
Sorry about the sneezing earlier. I didn't know I was unmuted.
Bless you.
Thank you. So I come from living with disabilities and on the autism spectrum, mental illness, and I talk a lot with people about how to be, forgiving of the self and, be easier on ourselves. And that's something that I just can't quite do, when you grow up with a lot of like abuse or trauma and stuff like that. And, and constantly making mistakes, it's just really difficult to find that space where you're able to be more forgiving. I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Well, I I recognize that, and I see it. And if I can be transparent, Alyssa, I heard that in you in our last conversation. That's part of the reason that prompted me to start this conversation today. And so I want to acknowledge that, because I want to appreciate that you were, in our last conversation, talking about the bio poem, able to be clear about some things that allowed me to say, oh, this is a part that I think we in the field need to really be conscious of. And so I think a big piece of it is being able to acknowledge it. You know, we can't solve all of them. And sometimes the best we can do is see it for what it is, be able to name it clearly, and then give ourselves permission, in spite of that being part of our truth, to still get on to the stuff that we got to do, right?
So just let it be. Like, even though, it's not gonna really be able to be fixed, like the logic behind it. And sometimes you just have to let it exist while you still move on.
Yeah, it's a part of us, in so many ways. So I'll use myself as an example. I often I'm spending time, encouraging and motivating young people, either experiencing, disability, navigating that world, or experiencing the justice system like I did, arrested at 11 and being stuck in that system. And at the same time, in the back of my head, there's still moments where I'm feeling like a complete imposter. And like, I'm feeling like, somebody's going to show up in a minute and be like, dude, why in the world are you trying to tell people how to have a better life, right? And what I've done, as Kimberly said, is I've given that voice a name. I've given it a space and accepted that that's a part of my story, especially through all of the trauma, which is a huge part of many of our experiences, right? And being able to see it and give it a place there means that I can actually isolate it, right? I can make sure that it only has that much space instead of letting it run rampant over my whole mind. And so with self-compassion, the idea is when I get caught up in those things, to go, oh, I see you, Hope Stealer. I see you. I saw you sneak in there. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a minute. Let's process it, and then I got to get back to work, right? And I've got my hope givers. I've got my hope dealers. I've got my other voices, right, that are showing me and telling me that I've got power, and I think those are important. And so it's about balance. And again, I'm trying to be really transparent that this is my experience navigating and leading people through this work, but we all have a different way to get to it. What I think for you in particular, Alyssa, is being able to recognize that where you are, you didn't get there accidentally. Nobody gifted you the opportunity to be, an amazing self-advocate and someone championing other folk. You chose to own that part of yourself, just like you own those other experiences in our past that we can't change, right? And that power, that deep compassion for yourself, and being able to look at yourself and go, girl, I don't know what you was thinking that time, but let's figure something out different for next time, right? Being able to just, and laugh about it, and be able to put it into perspective is important. And then we continue to move. Now, and I think that, like all of us here, it's the process. And so you continue to reach out to your support system, to your counselors, to your counsel, so that you can continue to build your ability to resist that, right? It doesn't happen naturally, but you're on the way, right? You're in the space and really, really making it happen. So, I think that's very powerful.
Thank you. I understand. I think what you're saying, and you've said a lot of stuff that's very new to me. So I really appreciate you. Thank you.
I'm so glad that we could take the time to dig into that. Thank you for being courageous enough to lean into the conversation. Any other thoughts as we transition? I know we've still got a little bit of stuff to do, and I'm okay with a little bit of silence. Actually, I'm not, but I've been practicing. I thought I saw a couple things in the chat, so let me see if I can. I really like the idea of naming the negativity. It helps you to recognize it and reverse it. Ebony, you're right. And one of the things that in coaching is there's a whole process on saboteur that I, as I started doing this, I actually was going to get into it. I was like, oh, wait, we're supposed to be high level work, and I'm not digging into the weeds. But there's some great processing you can do to identify your saboteurs and your superheroes, right? So it's not just naming those bad thoughts, but it's giving your courageous thoughts names and personalities too. So not that you're trying to figure out what you're running from, but it's trying to figure out what you're walking toward, right? The person that you're walking to, the attitude you're walking toward, not just what you're trying to get away from, because there's a big difference in trying to get away from negative attitudes and trying to move toward positive attitudes. Does that make sense? And so being able to name both of those gives us a lot of power when we get caught in the grip to decide what our fight, flight, or freeze response is going to be. Any last thoughts as we transition? So I wanted to start us with this idea of self-compassion, because I think that's a really important part. And let me just for a second kind of show you the scaffolds in case you're trying to figure out what are we doing. As we continue this selfish instrument of change conversation, and we're moving through understanding who we are, being able to hear our own voice, see our own experience, and operationalize that. Being able to hold all of those pieces with self-compassion, compassion for ourselves, and value for the experiences that we've had in a way that allow us to show up for other folks. The next part of our conversation today is literally leaning into difficult conversations. So using our self-compassion and our understanding to then start to pivot into those conversations that we might normally try to avoid, we run away from, but we know we have to have. All right. And so as you see, each of these pieces is moving us into that bigger conversation that Kim and Kisa are going to really start to build about how diversity, equity, inclusion frame out your big work, right? And so we really are doing this step-by-step dive into self. And I'll tell you, in 2 weeks, our last session is going to be about unconscious bias, the last big piece of me that I have to be aware of before I can dive into the big conversation of us, right? Of diversity, equity, inclusion, of justice for all, as Superman used to say, but now he doesn't say that anymore. I don't know why, but that's a question we can interrogate sometime. But we believe in it. And the core of all of this conversation has always been the really basic sense. We all deserve a chance to become the hero of our own story. You might have heard me say it a few times before. It's something that I lean into my lectures and my conversations with, but it's really about building the capacity to be the one driving the story, just like we want to build the capacity of the folk we serve to eventually be the ones driving and creating their story. All right? So we are going to, let me see where my slides are again. Found them. And interpreters, I hope that I'm doing a better job of giving you all space to actually breathe and navigate this without stress. I've been practicing my slow talking and making sure that I'm taking care of everybody on the team. And I really am happy that you all are here, making sure that we have the ability to connect to everyone who wants to be in the conversation. So, what about self-compassion as a way for us to get into difficult conversations? How we carry ourselves and being able to hold our hearts and our experiences, and then lean into, because once we can do that for ourselves, right, we can actually lean in and get to those places that we have to get to. So difficult conversations is the piece. And so what is a difficult conversation? Any conversation involving a topic we don't want to talk about, which there are many, and if we're going to frame it in diversity, equity, and inclusion, there are a whole lot. Maybe every conversation has the potential to be difficult. When we're talking about people's ideas, people's experiences, usually our conversation will be worried what will happen if we do talk about it. There'll be a change in relationship, there'll be a lost trust, there'll be a hurt heart, there'll be things that are different. And these kind of conversations happen in families, they happen in communities. As you can imagine, in the last few years, with the political turmoil, with the COVID problem, with the racial reckoning, all of those things which are moving and churning to create dramatic changes are really places where lots of difficult conversations happen. In fact, I've coached so many folk through family challenges, internal family challenges over vaccinated or not vaccinated, over whether Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, over whether, donkeys are cooler or elephants are smarter, and so all those places. So learning to navigate difficult conversations is a good tool being able to identify and to frame it out is a good tool for us wherever we are. Difficult conversations are those conversations that if we do talk about it, we likely think and feel a lot more than what we will actually say, right? We internalize, back to that rumination. Uh, we know I can't say that out loud, right? And so we start to spiral in our internal conversation, and sometimes that creates that stress and all those things that we talked about, right? So difficult conversations carry a lot of weight. Difficult conversations have have the potential for a great impact, and we have to be able to navigate those. And so that's why I wanted to make sure that we were having space for this conversation, leading us into the bigger pieces, which are all going to be, I think, as we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion in a intentional, action-oriented sense, it's going to create lots of space for difficult conversations. So difficult conversation is made more challenging by conflict. When there's already people mad at each other or pointing fingers or making assumptions. It's more challenging when there's fear, anger, or frustration. You've already let something go for a long time, or there's unsaid energy, power, or intention in the air, right? It's more challenging when there's anxiety and procrastination, right? Some of y'all might be like me, be like, if I put it off to the very, very, very last minute, let's wait till Friday at 4:55 to talk about it, because it makes my heart hurt, and I want to have the whole weekend to drink to get over it. I'm not saying everybody drinks, but maybe once in a while. It's challenging when there's disagreement or there's misunderstanding, and so this captures a lot of our everyday experience, especially in the work that we do, helping people navigate systems not designed for them, navigating and being part of trying to make systems work and respond to people differently than they have traditionally. And they say things like, well, this is the only way we do it, and this is the way we've always done it, so why should we do it different? So there's a lot in there, not even getting to the big conversation of diversity, equity, or inclusion in the work that we do every day that creates challenges and spaces for difficult conversations. So our ability to start practicing those things make us much more deft and nimble, getting into, through, and to the end of those and to productive work. And especially when we start to add the lens of, obvious lens of equity and diversity, justice as the big frame that I use that I think is really much more powerful. All right, preparing for difficult conversation, there's some things that you can do to kind of get yourself ready. Move from certainty to curiosity, from absolutely knowing something to I wonder about something. We'll talk more about that. Prepare at the level of content, right? Managing feelings and understanding some about how identity might play out. And again, I've got another slide for this too, right? So the key words here are content and identity and feelings, all right? Have the content, understand the feelings, and then figure out how identity might be a part of it. Embrace the both and. There are so many stories out there, right? One for every person, or, I got 7, so, at least one for every person. And our ability to recognize that before we get into the conversation, to be able to say there's more than one way to see it, more than one way to understand it, and more than one way to interpret it, it gives us space to actually navigate and move in the conversation. Because the idea of the conversation is not a conversation if you're going to tell someone what their problem is, what they did, and what they need to do, right? That's just instruction. If you're having a conversation, it means that you're trying to get to some place together. And that means that you have to be able to see all the other nuances, even if you don't like them, even if you don't agree with them, even if you don't think that they're absolutely valid, you have to see and understand what that perspective is that is being brought to you. Separate intention from impact. There's a saying that somebody's told me once, all of us love to be judged on our intentions, but we very often judge others on their impact, right? We want to, when we make a mistake, we say, but I didn't mean to do that. What I was meaning to do was this. And being able to have that recognition is important. Strengthen the capacity to name that impact, right? To say what it is. And the most difficult conversations are the ones that you don't have, because the more we ignore them, the more we put them off, the more we pretend that they're not necessary, not important, not the one thing that has to happen, the more likely that it's going to grow into a bigger challenge and exacerbate and actually probably impact more of our work and the things that we're trying to get done. All right. So I told you about content, feelings, and identity. And so this is the model for navigating difficult conversations. Starting with content, the ability to exchange and understand information about the core challenge, the thing that is going on, the tension, the disagreement, right? Just the contents is kind of the fact part of it, the things that you can get to that are clear or you can make clear with each other. Feelings, how is each person feeling about what's going on? What might be activated or triggered for each? As we dig into conversations about equity and diversity, there's this whole other layer. We start to think about microaggressions, talk about people's past experiences that might be informing what's going on a subconscious level, how they might be assuming that you're speaking in a voice that sounds very similar to a voice that was intentionally disrespectful or hurtful, even though that's not you. But being able to pull that out, to get that on the table, allows us then to navigate it. And identity, how each person's identity is impacting their interpretation and meaning making for the content. We all see through the eyes of our experience, so that is the lens. Our experience and our history is the lens always coloring or changing the thing that's in front of us. And so content, feelings, and identity are the core pieces that we have to keep in the kind of the moving parts of the wheel that we have to keep in mind as we dig into difficult conversations. Content mistakes, right? Talking about that first big bucket, right, of the data. The first mistake is often we believe we're right and they're wrong, right? I know what happened. Let me just tell you. You don't need to talk to anybody else. That's a big red flag in a real conversation. Mistake number 2, we don't ask enough questions. We have assumptions, and I'm saying we have assumptions that we go in with. We have conclusions that we go in with. We already know. We're just trying to get affirmation. And that's very different than trying to get information, which is being able to ask questions, to interrogate, to do follow-up. When I was a lawyer, cross-examination, right? The ability to ask questions that draw out more information and create more clarity. And in difficult conversations, very often we don't, because we're trying to get to the end so fast that we want to just put down what we have so that we can, close it off. And number 3, start off wrong, because we start off with our story. And we try to start with what's called the third side, or the third story. And I'll go into a little deeper. Shift from a what happened conversation to a learning conversation. So the shift from a what happened to a learning conversation takes a willingness to see and acknowledge your own contribution to your difficult conversation, right? Instead of how did I let them bring me here? How did we get here, right? What was my contribution? What was it in our last meeting or conversation that I said that might have let them believe or think that this next thing was acceptable, that now we got to go back and deal with, right? So being able to put yourself in the equation as part of the problem, not just on the balcony as the problem solver, is a very different way. And that's how we get into the conversation. And here's the what happened conversation. There's the truth, there's the intent, and there's the blame. I know the truth, I know your intent, and I know who's to blame. Okay? That's kind of how what happened conversations work, and that's why they're not very useful if we're trying to actually get to some kind of result with a partner. The slippery slope of what happened is, the truth trap. When I know that I'm right and you must be wrong, then there really isn't a lot of place to go in conversation. I'm not inviting people to actually be in the space with me, right? Even as you think about that compassion and self-compassion, I'm not creating a space for them. I'm creating good room for fight, flight, or freeze response, right? And the intention trap. When we think we already know what the other person's intention was, we know why they let the door go, right? Because they disrespected me. It didn't have anything to do with the fact that they had both their hands full and they were holding with their pinky and then it slipped, but so we kind of build in. And so when we think we know others' intentions, we often assume they have bad intentions and often assume that our intentions were the good ones. Then there's the blame game, when we spend time trying to establish blame or fault, which only creates anger, defensiveness, and frustration. Usually drives to the external experience of fight, flight, or freeze, okay? And so, again, these are the pieces that we want to avoid. We don't want to go into a conversation, well, if you want to be effective and you're trying to really get to results, it's best not to step into a conversation knowing the truth. Stepping into the conversation, understanding and being clear on intention, or being clear on the blame. Your ability to be flexible and to hold a loose lens with those going into the conversation gives you more space to explore. In a learning conversation, instead of wanting to win and get your way, you have to want to actually understand. And that, again, has become one of the most difficult parts of any conversation in the last 2 years. People want to win and be right about the vaccine being the best thing, or about, it being something from the government. They want to be right about, the history of this nation and its impact on Native people and Black people and people of color and people, who are non-gender normative, all of that. And so there's a whole lot of conversations going on in real time now that are not learning conversations, that are not moving us to communities that can value difference, right? Because the whole idea of diversity is not just we value the diversity we like, we also have to create space for the diversity we don't like. That means the voices and the people and the attitudes that aren't the ones that we love have to be there, because that's actually the conversation that we're having, right? We're telling other people in the whole world that they have to create space for, these brains and bodies that aren't like theirs. And sometimes part of that means that we also need to be making space for those thoughts and ideas that are not like ours. Ask what has happened from the other person's point of view. It's very insightful when you can take a deep breath and say, what was your experience of that? And then say, well, I didn't realize that, but let me tell you what I saw. Explain your point of view. When I was looking at it, this is what I saw, right? I saw that they were doing this thing, share and understand feelings that surface, right? Okay, how did that make you feel? Well, God, I got so nervous because I thought that this next thing was going to happen, right? And then figure out how to go forward. Well, what do we do with this information? Now that I know that you saw something different and it was a little different than me, and we've been, how do we move forward so that both of us can be productive and find ways to keep in relationship and keep doing good work, right? So that is the framework, and it's not easy, even if it looks a little bit easy right there. I'm going to take a deep breath and see if there are any questions, because I've got the fire hose out. Okay, I'll have time for more questions at the end. So shift content from what happened to learning. All right, from the truth, being the one with the truth, what's my story, to perception, what's their story. From intention, what assumptions am I making, to impact, What was the impact on me? Because that's something that you can be clear on, right? You don't know why people did something, but you can still say, well, I don't know why you turned left, but when you turned left, you hit my car, right? That's clear impact. And so I can't say, well, you turned left because you knew I just bought this car and I still got 3 payments on it and it was going to put, right? That's a whole lot, but you damaged my car and now I have to do something. That's really clear impact. From blame, what if we each contribute to the situation? You know, you did this, then I did this, then you did this, and then I did this. To, you know, how can we fix it? You know, how do we move forward? How do we put this behind us and create a new path, a new way, a new attempt at least at something? All right, and so that's the whole of the content conversation. Now, feelings is a little more nuanced, right? But if you don't own your feelings are going to own you. And we lean into emotional conversation with emotion very often. Ignoring or refusing to acknowledge and deal with your feelings, your own and the other person's, is the most common mistake made in dealing with difficult conversations. Being able to see and recognize the emotion and not just the facts is important. You know, and when I was being trained as a lawyer, you know, it was always, you know, like, you know, dragnet, just the facts, ma'am. But it really isn't about just the facts. It's so important to be able to, as you tap into your compassion, your self-compassion, as you think very intentionally about the ecosystem, right? What this moment and this experience between maybe 2 people, the impact that it has for the whole system. And so feelings and emotions are important part of that. One of these, you know, I always say, I like the way, I guess not just young people, but on Twitter, you always see that, like, you know, me, such, also me, you know, but, and so I did, you know, feelings are like, yeah, we make relationships enjoyable and satisfying, but feelings, we also make difficult conversations really, really difficult, right? And feelings are a huge part of how we carry ourselves in the world, how we manage and measure impact and experiences. And so I just wanted to stop there. We've still got another piece to get into, and I'm going to dig into feelings some more, but I felt really disconnected having that slide up for so long. So I've taken it off so that I can see all the boxes at least, and see if there are any questions, comments, or concerns, some thoughts in where we are right this moment. Bueller.
You know, it's all really good, valid things. I guess as I listen to it and as I'm in the middle of some tough conversations, I think it's really hard when you have the understanding and you feel like you're doing all the tools and all the things, but you're not getting it back. And so it's really hard when this is the understandings on one side and trying to open that space to come to a resolution with somebody who just doesn't want to come to a resolution. They just want you to know how they feel with no logical end to the conversation, you know?
Yeah. And that's great, Brenda. And I think, Brenda, so I think that takes us back to one of the early things I said. That's not a person looking for a conversation, right? They're looking for a vent. And sometimes if we give folks a place to just vent because they've been holding this in and you happen to be the one, and it's usually painful, but you can usually pretty quickly see that it's not really about you, but you might be the only one that actually gave them enough space to actually let it all go. And so even then, if we can tap into our compassion, our self-compassion, say, okay, clearly they needed a safe space to let that go. And maybe the footnote is, in a week or so, maybe I can reconnect and say, hey, I just want to check in and see that, after our last conversation, right? Because it was technically a conversation, even though it was just that one-way thing. After our last conversation, if there might be space for us to figure out our path forward, right? And so it doesn't commit you to anything, because it doesn't commit them to anything, but it opens the door and shows that you are still here in this space, prepared to be a partner in however that works out. How does that feel?
That's a good thought. Time, so it may not resolve at the end, and you don't have to have that resolution when they walk out the door that time. You give them a little more space and then maybe reapproach it. That's a good thought. Very good thought.
Good.
Hassan?
Yes.
So two things have been floating for me. One, these strategies allow me to be in a conversation in a way where I get to be there versus I have to be there. I think what I'm hearing from you gives me permission to engage and be intentional, and not come from a place of interpreting other people's behavior, but being really aware of my own and how I'm showing up in the conversation. Because I think when I don't do that, that's when I have to be in it. That's when I'm like trying to protect myself and interpreting other people's intentions and what they want from the conversation. So I really have also appreciated that this takes the bite out of things, understanding where it came from, helps me to be solution oriented or how to move forward. So I don't know, I'm fangirling over here. It's like, why didn't someone tell me this when I was like 14, 15, 16,
right.
or in college, to have the foundation about taking responsibility for how I show up in the conversation, which is also how I show up in doing transformational work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm gonna go back now and just keep fanning over here.
Thanks, Kisa. There's a Chinese proverb that says the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. And I always think about that, like, if you would have done it 20 years ago, now you'd have fruit, you'd have shade, it would be amazing, but you missed the opportunity. The rest of the proverb says the second best time to plant a tree is right now. And we always have right now. And I think that's the piece that is so powerful about having this framework, right? Because instead of living in regret, right, we can live in possibility of the moment. I'm in my second best time and I'm going to take advantage of it. And if it doesn't work today, guess what? Tomorrow is my second best time. And so being able to hold that, and I share your frustration, of not having, these tools. In fact, a lot of the tools that I use now, I went back and retooled them and started using them teaching high school and middle school and college students, because I was so frustrated at the fact that I had to wait till I was a high level leader in a national agency before somebody was like, oh yeah, you have potential. Let me show you some. I was like, what? Yeah, I was pretty upset too. And so, yeah, I agree. And I think that's why these connections are so valuable, starting to create a frame for folk to have access to these tools in a way that they can use them and use them for a long time. So I'm excited. And I'm so glad that y'all are here and y'all are still here. I've got just a little bit more that I want to talk about, and then to finish up our difficult conversation framing. And I'll tell you, this is, really tight. I had to spend a lot of time cutting a lot of stuff. I love experiential stuff and all those things. And so I've had to frame it just to make sure I can get the core pieces of this in. And I think that, there's space, you know, once we get through this conversation, if there's interest, for us to look at how we go deeper. That's a conversation that that the TA Center has been open about. You know, they really want to provide you all with the tools that you want and that you need. And so I think as we move forward, we can, at the end of this process, we'll get to see what next things might be useful from not just Keisha, Kim, and I, but from others. And so I think that's the great thing about being in this conversation, and why I'm excited and was excited to be invited to be a part of this with you all. So okay, difficult conversations, content. We really dug deep into content, and I've got just a couple of slides. We got feelings, and then, you know, we've got identity. And the reason that content is really the place where we're holding right now, because I think that is where so much goes wrong, right? Those front end pieces. I think right now, in the moment of the world, we are in feeling conversations more. And so being able to access and navigate that feeling piece is going to be very valuable. One, because it really is the core. You know, I call it it's the affective domain. I call it the feeling house, that part of us that is not about intellectual cognition, not about, you know, logic and order. And it's the piece that we don't talk about much in our work, right? Developmentally, we talk about cognition and Bloom's taxonomy and all those things, but we are absolutely missing the boat if we're not talking about affective domain, feeling and healing connection, okay? And it's so valuable because it can be leveraged, right, to help us through our content conversations. It can be leveraged to help us navigate the identity parts of the conversation. So it really is the core, the connector. You know, it is the a central piece of how we get into and get out of successfully and effectively difficult conversations. And so I don't want to discount the idea and the sense of this. You know, one, this is my natural place. Feelings. A lot of people are like, oh God, emotion. We're talking about that again. But this is kind of where I naturally lean into as a leader and start to draw out. And so it helps me build to those other cognitive fact-based pieces and help me build to the relational and identity pieces. And so you may have less value for it or more. You know, each of these has strengths and weaknesses. When we think about, you know, content versus feelings, or, you know, as we go into identity, you know. So difficult conversations are not just difficult because we have to face other people, but because we have to face ourselves, right? And back to that idea of self-compassion, if we aren't practicing self-compassion, if we haven't mastered our hope dealer voice over our hope stealer voice, then difficult conversations can drag us into questions of our own competency, of our goodness, of our worthiness, and that starts that spiral, right? And anytime we get into difficult conversations, there's a part of it that might be about loss. In order to acknowledge someone else, there might be something I have to acknowledge about me or lose, right? In order to elevate somebody else's thinking, I might have to remove one of the things I assumed, one of the thoughts I had, off the table, right? And so there's a lot in that. And again, as you notice with the bio poem, as you notice with the River of Life, and the reason those were so valuable and so generative is because they give us glimpses of our best and worst, the challenges and the difficulties and the aspirations and the triumphs, right? And all of those are a part of identity, not just for us, but for the people sitting across from us that may have walked into the room sideways, angry, right? They are still human beings full of all the same hopes and expectations, and we have to be able to see them and understand what they're bringing And the big thing about this identity piece is when we, especially when we frame it about around diversity, equity, and inclusion, around justice, the capital J, is right. People are coming into the conversation wounded, worried, or worn out, right? If they have been, part of a section of the community that has been demonized or ostracized or over policed or underserved and supported, all those things become part of the identity they bring in. And so it may even create a whole other level of challenge externally, right? Because for them, it may be that that difficult conversation that you're having to have about their work or about their behavior or about their interaction may be challenging their competence based on the fact that, the whole world has told them something about how people like them show up and what they can do, or maybe challenging their sense of being a good person because they've been demonized. They've been often, seen and recognized and used as the bad guy, as the bad person. Are they worthy of love? And so it's not just that we're holding this identity for ourselves, is that we have to, again, continue to keep that double vision, right? Where I'm seeing me and I'm seeing you, and I'm being able to see how all these pieces are working together. And I can ask the question, where do we want to go from here, right? How do you want to proceed? What is the most useful thing that we can do to repair or at least maintain the connection that we have? Because most difficult conversations aren't the conversations that you have to have when you're about to fire somebody. It's the conversation you have to have because you don't want to fire somebody, that you have to have because you don't want to unfriend somebody on Facebook, right? Because if you get to the point where you're already ready to get rid of them, then it's not a conversation. Again, it's that information piece. It's just letting you know. It's back to those parts that we were looking at earlier, right? I know what happened. I know what your intent was, and I know who to blame. And so if that's not the conversation we're in, if we're in a conversation that we're in because we're trying to preserve community, we're trying to strengthen and support team, then we have to be holding for ourselves and for them a sense of that, what they bring into the room, their experience, their identity, and how we hold all of that up and still get to some kind of solution, some kind of opportunity for a deeper conversation. Take a deep breath there. Take us back to the model. All right. Content is exchanging and understanding information about the core challenge, conflict, tension, or disagreement. Right. Moving away from assuming that we know the truth, assuming that we understand the intent, and assuming that we're clear about the blame, right? Being able to hold an expansive sense that all of those things are moving. Feelings, how each person feeling about what's going on, what might be activated, what might be triggered for them based on their own trauma, drama, and pain, based on their own sense of the conversation that the whole world might be having about them, with them, or for them. And then identity, how each person's identities are impacting their interpretation and the meaning making of a content, the way you say it and how it's coming at them, right? If they're, in part of a community that's always been talked down to and talked at, even if you're trying to be a mentor, it might seem like you're lecturing, or that you're talking down, or you're, speaking like you're in a position of being better, right? All these things are things that you don't have to intend in order for them to be another person's truth. That's why it's important for us to be intentional about raising them, right? Doesn't mean that you're not going to stumble through. I stumble through difficult conversations all the time, but I have the ability, because I know what to look for, to catch myself sometimes and say, hold on, let me take a deep breath and reframe, because I see where I was going. I was getting caught up in the fight, flight, or fright, and I need to take a deep breath and refocus, right? And so it isn't about not messing up. Just like when you get into deeper to the conversation about diversity, it's not about not making missteps or not miscalling or misnaming or misseeing something. It's about the ability to, when that happens, now with your awareness and your critical skills, go, oh, I see what I did there. Hold on. Let me see if I can navigate this different, or if I can repair that, because at least I see it, instead of people getting caught in that sense, well, this is just who I am, I'm not going to change. Because the truth is, what we know now, the science tells us, is that people develop and grow over time. And so there are no ingrained processes with us that cannot be navigated or changed if we want to. So this conversation was framed out of work done by Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton, Sheila Heen, and Difficult Conversations. They have some amazing work. These two books in particular are very valuable. They have workbooks and things like that. I think the first time I went through Difficult Conversations training was actually like 20 years ago, when I was a Rockefeller Foundation Next Generation Leadership Fellow. And again, I was like, why y'all wait till I had all these really bad difficult conversations before somebody decided to give me the tools I need to do this better? And so maybe in some of these cases, this is us giving you a chance to do this better sooner. So before we get to our final check out, I want to stop, see y'all, at least see your boxes. I don't know, and questions, comments, concerns, thoughts about difficult conversations as we think about our homework for next week or in 2 weeks, and finish out our checkout. Anybody?
Sounds like there's a lot of people stewing, Hassan, and all his thought-provoking info.
Yeah, I always feel bad about that, because I do feel like just like drop everything, be like, all right, deal with that. I'll see y'all later. So, I mean, you got the slide deck. You've got the slide deck. You can go back over and you can process it at your own pace. Now you've got a framing for it. And this is something that just takes time. It takes intention. And I think that it's not impossible to do. It's just challenging. That's why most people don't do it, because it does take work. Thoughts before we go to homework and check out?
Hassan, can I jump in for a quick second?
Please. Yeah.
So one of the things that has happened organically with this group is that Hassan is doing the work around who you are, how you show up, and what you do. And then Kim is talking about how does this work out into the community, and giving us an example of how you impact your community and you show up for them. But then my piece is around how do you as an organization do some transformative work around who you are and how do people move. That was not intentional. That is not, we didn't know each other before we started this. We didn't know how it would all land together. But it is so, again, I'm fangirling over here, because oftentimes when we look at diversity, equity, inclusion, we look outside first. We think what other people need to do to either make me feel uncomfortable, feel included, or being part of community. And your conversations 2 weeks ago and today keep reminding me that equity starts with you first. Equity starts with what's your foundation? How do you show up? How do you navigate? How do you intentionally listen? How do you do all of those things? Because we often keep saying it's other people, it's other people. And I just keep sitting in this space with you that says, no, equity is me. I'm equity. It lives in me. And then how I navigate influences how other people are heard, included, and a part of community. So sorry that was long-winded. I'm practicing speaking slower and less. I failed, but I just wanted to make the connection again that you're telling us to start with ourselves. Kim is showing us how to make moves in our community. And then I'm going to talk to you about how are you having intentional conversations in your organization, which all lead to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, that's it. You know, and Keisha, funny, you know, when we first started this, right, you know, a lot of my work was going to really be about that engagement with young people and and as I leaned into it, and we've still done that, but it really did hit me after some of our conversation, just what you said, that I was like, oh crap, I'm not getting, you know, I'm getting them an experience, but I'm not getting them ready for the rest of the work. And so that really is what drove me to dig into my tool, because, you know, I think I was bringing my B game, right? I was like, oh yeah, I do this all the time. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. You know, I got to make sure that they are ready for the rest of this conversation with Kim and Keisha. And so there was some sense and a shift, right? The reason my PowerPoint doesn't get to Amy until the day before is because I'm like, I've got to put this together in a different way, not the way that I've got canned. And so I've really been scouring through all of the work, thinking about this group, saying, you know, the three of us need to give them an arc that really does land them right on the target. And I think that that's for me, that's actually been exciting. It's forced me to dig into some of the pieces that I've not pulled out and given to other people, right? I use and you just assume about. But it's been great to be in this space with you all, knowing that I'm able to be a part of leading us into the deeper conversation. And I know we've only got a couple minutes left, so I'm going to give you all homework. And as we finish out our conversation, this conversation about difficult conversation, so a couple things, and you all have slides. There's a video on your slide deck. The link should be live that I want you to watch. And it's a video about funders and implicit bias. The reason I'm including it, and it's not about any of the work that we do directly, is because in my experience, I've found it's easier to see and recognize and hear things if it's not pushing against your own lens directly. Right, and so it's a woman talking about equity and grant making and bias and how that plays in. And so I want you to watch that video and listen to it, and I want you to excuse me, experience it with self-compassion, and I want you to reflect on yourself and identify your own implicit biases that you might hold. Right, so I'm asking you to go a little deep, to think some about what you might be holding about folk around you, about how people show up, how people move through the world, and with the lens of self-compassion, not beating yourself up because you got, oh, I can't believe I thought that, but being able to say, with the same framework we use for difficult conversations, I wonder what that is, right? What is the curiosity you can hold around it that you can bring into our next conversation? And on the second slide, there's a picture of an iceberg. The iceberg, well, excuse me, it's a pyramid, but it represents the iceberg analogy, where we talk about the tip of the iceberg is only a small percentage of it, but it's the thing that we see. And so very often, all of our assumptions are based on that, the events and the things that play out that we can actually witness. And so much of relationship, so much of unconscious bias is based on all the stuff that's below the surface, that doesn't come up in a casual conversation or a series of events that just play out. It's the patterns of behavior, that next level down. What's been happening? What are the trends? What are the changes that have occurred? Right. So that's the structures of the system, and then the mental model. So the three layers below the surface, which are really driving the real impact that we're seeing above the surface. And so when we talk about implicit bias, and we talk about the last part of this, my framing is going to be us unpacking some of this, talking about mental models that we carry, talking about how we push against those and how we resist and challenge structures and question patterns of behavior and interrogate them in a way that allow us to see how they might be negatively impacting the folk in our community that we love and want to lift up. But the whole system has been designed to keep them from doing that, and then how you fight and push against that. Okay, so that's going to be our last big conversation. It's going to be a lot, but it's not going to be impossible. We're navigating, and you all are doing amazing work. So I'm excited about it, and I look forward to it. I know that I wanted to leave a couple minutes for Amy. So as a checkout, just in the chat, how are you doing? And one reflection or learning or aha from today, while Amy is giving us her last instructions. How are you? And one reflection or learning from today's conversation. Okay. And with that, Amy, I will turn it
over to me.
To you.
Oh, I just can't thank you enough, Hassan, for just a wonderful, thought-provoking session. And what we're thinking maybe in the future is that we'll do small breakout sessions where we can maybe meet with participants through the Zoom, in a more intimate session level. But I just wanted to give a really quick update about the technical assistance products that have been released. And we have technical assistance products that have been released for Centers for Independent Living, for councils, for protection and advocacy agencies, for USETs, for traumatic brain injury grantees. And then we also have a slew of more generalized technical assistance products. And so what I'm going to do is share the link so that grantees on this call can simply click and be redirected to the DETAC's website to find more information about those resources. So please utilize them. We did a lot of research to make sure that these products would be applicable, would be viable. And so if you have any questions, reach out to us, but we're just thrilled to share some of these products that were released, and we actually have quite a bit more that we'll be releasing within the next month. And so that is the only update that I had to give. Please tap into those resources and let us know if you have any questions. Hassan, I just want to turn it back over to you just to wrap up and say, final remarks if you'd like before we end the call today.
Yeah, do good, be great. I can't wait to see y'all in a couple of weeks. You all did great. Thank you.